Thank you very much. I'm going to start with, as I always do, the latest COVID numbers. In Massachusetts, as of yesterday, we had 182 new confirmed cases, bringing the total to 121,396 confirmed cases. 4 deaths yesterday, bringing the total deaths in Massachusetts to 8,937 cases. In Boston, yesterday, we don't have today's numbers yet, 34 new cases, bringing our total to 16,001. We had no deaths recorded yesterday. The total remained for people who lost their life in Boston is 754. And for the last 9 days, we have not had anybody pass away from the coronavirus. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the family members that are still suffering from the coronavirus, as well as the families who lost loved ones. For the past week, ending September 5th, these are trends. Our positive rate in Boston is 1.5%. It continues to move in the right direction. If you remember, 2 weeks ago, I believe we were at 2.8%, and we're at 1.5% now citywide, and that's a 7-day average. We have over 3,200 tests in Boston residents every single day. We're testing residents. Colleges account for roughly half of that number. That's important. With thousands of students coming into Boston, we need to make sure they're tested so that we can detect any new infections. And despite the number doubling our testing, our numbers of positive tests have not gone up. They've gone down slightly from 48 to 47 cases per day, so we have 2 good trends. Case of numbers going down citywide, and obviously the college students with very low infection rates as well, which is good in our city. Some good news in East Boston. We talked a little bit about it on Tuesday, but our positive rate in East Boston as of the last 7 days is 6.6%. If you remember, 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, it was actually up at 11%. This is still higher than we want, but we continue to come down since the outreach plan began from 11.4%. Mobile testing teams are active with over 1,000 total tests in East Boston last week. That's not inflated with college testing. That is East Boston, mostly East Boston residents that are happening there. The mobile teams will stay in East Boston for an additional week, and we're going to continue additional outreach. Every other neighborhood in the city that was under 4% are now most are under 3%. I think actually all are under 3%, and many are lower than that. I want to thank also the elected officials, State Representative Martiro, State Senator Joe Boncore, and City Council Lydia Edwards, because we had a call about a few weeks ago to talk about how do we work to bring these numbers down. I'm certainly grateful for everyone doing their part. We're going to continue providing widespread testing all across the city and access to testing. We're going to continue to provide information on food and rent relief to residents, and PPE and signage to small businesses. For more information or resources, we're asking you to visit boston.gov/coronavirus and boston.gov/reopening. If you're a business or a private citizen, we can get you as much information and help as possible to move to open safely and to stay open. We continually need everyone to work together. That means staying 6 feet apart from each other, wearing a mask, washing your hands with soap and water as often as possible, and also cleaning surfaces that are frequently touched, both at work and at home. I'm suggesting that you get a flu shot. It's important because the flu season is coming, and what's happening is a lot of the symptoms for the flu is the same as coronavirus, and if you can keep that ability to keep those symptoms down, that would be a good thing. If you operate a business, we ask you to follow the guidelines and make sure your employees and customers can follow them as well. And as I said Tuesday, we're asking people, suggesting that they have conversations with their employees just to kind of think about where we are today and where they might be today as well. If you're a college student, we're asking you to follow your college guidelines. If you live in a large household with several roommates or multiple generations, we're asking you to be extra cautious. We're asking people to avoid large gatherings. And if you've been to a party or a gathering of any kind, assume that you've been exposed to the virus and get tested to protect yourself and your family. I appreciate deeply the sacrifices that everyone's making right now, and talking to a lot of people about where we are in the virus and the concerns people have, but it's important for us to continue to stay vigilant in protecting ourselves and protecting our loved ones. COVID-19 is still with us. And the precautions we've been taking are still necessary, and clearly by looking at the numbers, they work. At the same time, we're moving forward as a city. The largest ever investment in our schools happened this year. I want to thank the teachers on working on an agreement The agreement is a result of months of work between the Boston School Department, Superintendent Brenda Casilius, and the Boston Teachers Union. Equity, public health, and safety were the key priorities to this agreement. Again, Dr. Brenda Casilius, thank you, and Jessica Tang, the president of the BTU, thank you for making this possible. The framework of the agreement is random COVID testing for 5% of the Boston Teachers Union membership weekly, first by high positive neighborhoods, so we have the breakdown by neighborhoods, and then staff working in high risk with high risk student populations, and then we look at citywide. Additional training for educators on remote learning. With a waiver for BTU teachers will be able to bring their school-age children who are in K-12 schools with them for any fully remote learning times in the event they can't find childcare. So that's any fully remote learning times that we don't have children in the classroom. We're going to make accommodations for teachers to be able to bring their children that can't find childcare. The focus in this framework is ensuring the safety of everyone in our schools. We're also completing branch library renovations in Roxbury and Dorchester. These are transformative new spaces that will be opening shortly. We're advancing master plans for historic investments in Franklin Park and Boston Common, and that's due to the sale of the Winter Square Garage. We have 1,300 units of affordable housing currently under construction. During the pandemic, we have housed nearly 250 homeless individuals, including 85 veterans, so we're still continually doing our work in finding housing for homeless individuals. We have issued rental vouchers to 739 homeless families with children in the Boston Public Schools. If you remember, we announced this, I believe it was early summer, that we had 1,000 vouchers and we wanted to get it out, and our Housing Authority and D&D have been working really hard to make sure that we place families, so 739 homeless families live now in their own home. Many of these families are in their home for the first time. We are determined to come out of this pandemic a more equitable city than we entered it. COVID shined a light on what inequity looks like in our city and certainly across our country. It makes us a lot more vulnerable. It reminds us that we depend on each other and that everyone's life has equal value. To be a strong city, we need to be a city that works for everyone, where everyone knows they have a fair shot and a real opportunity. We continue to need to push for equity across the board. That's why our work in ending systemic racism is so vitally important. And it's why our response to George Floyd's murder in late May was so powerful and has continued to be powerful. Systemic racism kills and destroys trust and hope. The new levels of passion in this movement for justice inspired us to listen and work more urgently. So on June 12th, we declared racism a public health crisis in the city of Boston. We took a number of steps to act on it. Moved 20% of our police overtime budget into anti-racism and community health programs. That work is moving forward actively as we speak. Our COVID Health and Equities Task Force is developing a plan called Health Equity Now. We're working with hospitals and health centers on a range of different strategies. We're strengthening our use of force policies in collaboration with our police department to build on our progress as a national leader in de-escalation and community policing. And I would argue that we already were a leader on that, and it's important for us to continue to do the work and continue to adjust as we move forward. We appointed a police reform task force to make sure the progress continues, and the community is shaping that progress. The work of the task force is what I want to talk a little bit about today. It was chaired by U.S. Attorney Wayne Budd. Its members are drawn from civil rights organizations, community activists, clergy, the legal community, and our officers of color. They've worked hard all summer long. They started out with a scope, where we broadened the scope. They've held 4 listening sessions on key issues. Anyone who wanted to share their views were heard. They took on board written testimony as well. They got written testimony from the public. They researched the issues and their history, and they talked to experts and activists working both in Boston and in other cities around the United States of America. Now they have produced a draft recommendation, and this is a draft recommendation. They're inviting the community to give your input before we move forward with implementation. We have received a report in English, and we're working on translating it right now into Spanish, Vietnamese, Cabo Verdean Creole, Haitian Creole, and Chinese by tomorrow. The task force will take written comments starting next week, and they'll hold a public listening session on the 22nd, Tuesday the 22nd. You can find that on boston.gov/endingracism. That's boston.gov/endingracism. I received a briefing on the recommendations this morning that I can summarize a little bit to the public right now. The first is to replace the co-op board with a new body called the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency. It would have the power to investigate complaints and subpoena witnesses and evidence. We want to increase trust and accountability to ensure fairness for residents and officers. Since 2013, complaints of improper conduct have fallen in Boston by over 40%. Excessive use of force complaints in Boston have dropped in that same time period by over 50%. In 2019, we had only 21 complaints against our officers. We want those incidents to remain low and actually go lower. And at the same time, we want residents to feel comfortable coming forward with any concern that they might have. The second is to strengthen the work of our police department does with diversity and inclusion. Currently, 22% of our uniformed officers are African American, 11% are Latino, 2.5% are Asian, and 14% are women. Those numbers are good by national standards, and we brought back the police cadet program to create diverse pipeline for our neighborhoods to law enforcement careers. But we need to be closer to our population demographics in every single category. And we need to have policies and systems in place that support officers of color and help them move their career forward. The third recommendation is to expand the body-worn camera program and continue to ban the use of biometrics and facial recognition software. The City Council, I know City Council Frank Baker's with us today. The City Council already voted to do that. And we'll continue to get feedback from the community and experts on how we're doing as we move forward. The fourth recommendation item is to enhance the use of force policies so that rules and the consequences are clear to both the officer and the public. We need both the officer and the public to understand the rules and practices. The fifth and final recommendation is to adopt practices around record keeping and data that ensures transparency and public access. I just invite everyone and I urge everyone to read the draft recommendations and would love to get your input. The task force wants to hear from you, and I'm committed to taking action to respond to those, making your voices heard, and to make Boston a more equitable city. This has always been more than about more than just a moment. It's about process of change. Our steps in June were not one-time responses. These recommendations are not one-time actions. The activism should not be a one-time thing either. The goal is continued dialogue and improvement. It's a conversation, and we all need to stay engaged in it. I want to thank the Chairman, Wayne Budd, and the members of the task force. I want to thank every single community member who took time to share their experiences and their opinions. I want to thank the Bostonians who have been making your voices heard throughout the streets. Residents, I want to thank the elected officials, in particular the city councils, the activists, the Boston police officers. I want to thank everyone who had anything to do with this process. This is how community makes process together. This is how we should continue to make process together, collectively together. This is a healthy, necessary conversation for our city. And I call on all of us to continue this conversation. I'm asking you to please read the report, give your input. The report, again, is you'll get it. The report will be posted, I believe, tomorrow online at boston.gov/ending racism. That's boston.gov/ending racism. I just want to close by observing that tomorrow is September 11th. It's the 19th anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon in Washington, and Flight 93 in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 human beings lost their lives that day. It's not an easy time for their families, including many here in Boston and Massachusetts. So please keep all of those memories in your thoughts and prayers so that to never forget their loved ones. Normally we would have in-person observances tomorrow. This year the Massachusetts 9/11 Fund will host the annual commemoration virtually at its website starting at 8:30 a.m. We'll once again read the names of the 206 victims from Massachusetts. I also want to remember the over 400 victims that were first responders, including 60 police officers. This is a difficult day for first responders and their families. Many of them lost people they know and their colleagues and their friends. Many of them went to New York in the aftermath to help look for the survivors. They and their families know that they would offer the same sacrifice, and in fact they have. In the Marathon bombing and other acts of violence, members of the NYPD and FDNY came to Boston to help us. So as we talk about police reform, I like to remember we're talking about human beings who do a very difficult, dangerous job. They are moms and dads, sons and daughters. They are neighbors, coaches, and mentors and friends. and it's important for us to remember that. They are overwhelmingly great people who devote their lives to protecting all of us. They take guns off the streets every single day. They're there at our time of need. They put their safety on the line in both everyday situations and extreme circumstances like terror attacks. And I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank all the first responders for the great work that they do. The lesson of 9/11 is similar to the lessons we should take from 2020. We can't go back to a new normal. We have to create a new normal where everyone is heard and respected, and everyone receives equity, justice, no matter who you are. And I just want all of us tomorrow just to take a moment to think. I was talking this morning, a little while ago, to, I was on a call this morning actually, and I was talking to the team on the call, and I looked around on the Zoom call, and I realized that many of the people that were in the call were in their early 20s, and realized they were just babies themselves when 9/11 happens. And as quickly as time goes by, I know for my generation, 9/11 is our Pearl Harbor. It's a day that I will never forget. And I just want all the families to know that all the families who lost loved ones, you are certainly in my thoughts and prayers, not just tomorrow, but every day. With that, I'll open up for questions.
The new office that's recommended in the recommendations, OPAT, will that be staffed with civilians, and will it be housed within BPD?
Yeah, the recommendation is to staff it with civilians, and it will be housed in the city side. It would not be housed at BPD or City Hall. I'm going to wait till the final recommendations come through, but today I was very impressed with the work that the committee did, the task force. I said to them, I was, just every recommendation, there's very strong, valid points there. They took a real great look at it and took into account what's in place today with accountability and what's missing, and they really they did a great job.
And OPAT, their recommendations, would the commissioner have to follow their recommendations, or could they reject them if they wanted to?
Let me get you the whole breakdown, because when you see it, it can't answer it really quickly. You have to see the whole breakdown, because there's a whole structure.
Okay. What about the pledge? There's a recommendation that you pledge to implement the task force recommendations without increasing BPD's budget. Is that possible?
I don't remember seeing that in the recommendations, but that's something that we're going to see. I mean, one thing that's interesting now is that we made a commitment to cut 20% of the police overtime budget this year, and what we're seeing in the streets of Boston right now is, as we all know, we've seen an increase in homicides, we've seen an increase in shootings, we've seen a lot of parties going on in communities where police have to respond to. We had the situation around fireworks, so it's challenging in a good year to keep costs down, and this year, with these unexpected extra costs, we have to look and see what's happening. So I think that Office of Accountability will be funded through the city. We'll make those determinations as we move forward. I'm not going to put the risk of public safety, I'm not going to put people in Boston at public safety risk. I mean, if we need to fund police officers to keep us safe, we're going to do that. I think the defunding the police movement, it's gone in different directions right now. I'm not a supporter of defunding police. I'm a supporter of looking at what the job the police officers have today in Boston. I think many of them will tell you that a lot of times they get called to a scene that, quite honestly, that they should not be called to, where they're dealing with mental health and other things like that. That is something that they're not trained for. They're trained, but they're not equipped to deal with that. So I think we need to be looking at reallocation of some of the calls they get to see if there's a way to move forward.
There was a lot of discussion by the City Council this week about the arbitration process. Will the provisions in police contracts that allow for the arbitration process for appeals of disciplinary action, will those need to be changed for this new office to have any real teeth?
First of all, I don't think anything needs to, for this office to have teeth. This office, if it, once all the recommendations get put in place and we move forward, this office has teeth the way it's written. I'm not going to get into a conversation about contract negotiations because it'll put the city at a big disadvantage right now, because I know that my friends are probably listening saying, you said this on TV the other day, so I'm going to leave that one alone.
The reassessment of civil service requirements, it mentions that. What would that look like?
Reassessment of civil service, that's legislation. One of the proposals that I remember reading was that a Boston public graduate potentially get 2% on the test, or the Boston Compact, or somebody in Metco. So graduates of Boston Public School. Again, that's all legislatively. So a lot of the recommendations that are put in front of us, I would say probably 70% of the recommendations can be done by us, by the city, in the police department. I would say that there is some probably, I don't know, I'm pulling this number out of the sky, 20% needs legislative approval and change, and there's probably 5 or 6% that need contract change. There's not a lot that we need to change in a contract here, I don't think, to do what we want to do. So, you know, again, I just got the report last night, so we're going to have to dissect it and what we're doing here with it.
Did you have teeth? Is this a stronger oversight mechanism?
The way it's written is much stronger, but they incorporate the co-op board in a different way here into this report. It's not, and it didn't, and the co-op, I believe, got 20% of cases referred to them. This is every case could be referred to them. All right? Any other questions? All right, listen, thank you, everybody.
Within the police department?
No, it's going to be separate. It's not going to be here, and it's not going to be at BPD. It's not going to be in a district. Not sure we're going to house it yet. We'll have to figure out where we put it. Thank you.